cave. The cave found them first. That was the part none of the xenoarchaeologists ever included in their field reports. The way the entrance seemed to lean toward you. The way the air moving out of it was not cold, the way mountain air should be cold, but warm and pressurized, like breath. Dr. Mara Vasquez had been mapping the Cathani Ridge survey grid for 11 days before she found the hollow. The ridge sat on the third moon of Taurus Aphor, a frozen crag of a world that the Terran Survey Commission had flagged as geologically interesting and low priority for colonization. That second notation was bureaucratic shorthand for nothing worth fighting over, which was why a 6-person research team with 1 security liaison had been deemed sufficient. She remembered crouching at the entrance with her helmet lamp cutting a wedge of pale light into the dark. Remembered the smell even through her filtration mask. Something burnt and organic like old blood dried on heated stone. She remembered thinking, this is not a natural formation. She went in anyway. That was the thing about humans. They always went in anyway. The artifacts were Roman. That was the first impossibility. Not Roman-inspired, not vaguely reminiscent, Roman. The breastplate bore the stamping of a craftsman from the 2nd century CE. The short sword was a gladius, its blade corroded to the color of dried moss, but its geometry unmistakable to anyone who'd ever stood in the Colosseum's undercroft and stared at the display cases. The helmet had a transverse crest, officer's style, and something had cracked it along the crown in a blow that would have killed the wearer. She photographed everything. She logged it in triplicate, because that was the protocol, because Dr. Mara Vasquez had spent 19 years following protocols, had built her entire career on the principle that wonder was not an excuse for sloppiness. Then she saw the body. It lay curled against the far wall of the cave's inner chamber, mummified by cold and whatever dry chemistry lived in the stone, wearing the full regalia of a Roman gladiator. Greaves, sublegaculum, arm wrapping decayed to a faint brown outline on what remained of the flesh beneath. One hand was extended toward the center of the room where a stone basin sat, its interior dark, with something that had long since ceased to be liquid. The light from her helmet lamp hit the basin at an angle, and she saw the inscription carved into its rim. Latin. She had enough Latin to parse it. Through the vessel, the flame returns. Through the flesh. Demonicus walks again. She photographed that too. She did not touch anything. She backed out of the cave and walked the 40 meters to base camp and poured herself the last of her camp coffee, which was terrible, and sat for a long time looking at the ridge line. Security liaison, a compact man named Sergeant Errol Cade, found her there 20 minutes later. "You've got your archaeology face on," he said. "What face is that?" "The one that means you found something that's going to make my job complicated." She handed him her field tablet. He looked at the photographs for a while without speaking. "Romans," he said finally. "Romans on a moon of Taurus Aphor." Cade set the tablet down. He had a way of going very still when he was thinking, not frozen, just economic, like a man conserving himself for something he sensed was coming. She had noticed it in the first week and found it reassuring in a way she couldn't fully articulate.
"You went inside. I went inside."
"You didn't think." I didn't touch anything." He handed the tablet back. "Okay," he said. "We call this in. We wait for instructions. Nobody goes back in that cave until we have more information."
"Agreed."
"Agreed," she said, and she meant it. She meant it genuinely, in the moment she said it. She was not the kind of person who made agreements she intended to break. She went back into the cave at 0300 hours alone. The thing that took her was not gradual. That was what she would tell the tribunal later. In the cold white room on Meridian Station, with the medical team's reports spread across the table between her and 3 people whose job was to understand what she had done and who she had been when she did it. It was not gradual. There was the moment before she touched the basin's rim, and there was the moment after, and between them nothing. No sensation, no vision, no dramatic encounter with a presence. Just a gap, like a splice in footage. Came after the gap was Tyrannus. She learned the name later from the inscription she'd already read, but had not until after understood. Tyrannus. A Latin word, not quite, something older wearing Latin dress. The gladiator, whose desiccated remains lay 3 meters away, had been named Tyrannus, had been more than a gladiator. had been a vessel for something that required periodic embodiment to maintain its hold on existence. The last vessel had been a Roman soldier transported to this moon by means the xeno-archaeological record would take decades to untangle. The soldier had arrived here, had died here, and the thing inside him had waited. For 2,000 years, it had waited. It was very patient, it was very strong, and it had no idea what it had walked into. Cade found her at 0400 hours standing in the cave entrance. She was wearing the gladiator's breastplate over her survey suit. She had cleaned it somehow, and where the corrosion had been there was now burnished bronze. And she was holding the gladius in her right hand, and her eyes were wrong. Not the color, not even the expression. The eyes themselves were structurally correct, but the thing looking out of them was not Mara Vasquez. "Doc," Cade said. "Sergeant." Her voice had a resonance it hadn't had before. A layered quality like two recordings played slightly out of sync. "You are in my way." "Your way to what?" "My flock," It tilted the helmet-crested head toward the ridge where the rest of the team slept. "Sacrifice requires 6. I have the vessel. I require the blood." Cade put his hand on his sidearm. "I'm going to need you to put that sword down." What came out of Mara Vasquez's face was not quite a smile. "I was killing men in pits for the entertainment of thousands, while your kind was still figuring out fire. Do not lecture me on what you require." "That's fair," Cade said. "This is where I'm going to have to stop you." He drew. She crossed the 10 meters between them before the weapon cleared the holster. What he knew going into it, she weighed 58 kilos. He weighed 89. She had 17 years less combat training. She was holding a corroded antique sword. He was holding a military-grade plasma sidearm rated to 3 centimeter penetration on grade 4 armor. He learned in the first 4 seconds. None of that mattered even slightly. She put him on the ground with one movement that he could not later describe in any anatomical terms that made sense. It was not a throw, not quite a strike. More like a redirection that used him against himself in a way no human body should have been able to accomplish. He kept hold of the weapon through reflex alone. She stepped on his wrist with a precision that suggested she understood exactly where the bones were and exactly how much pressure was required to make him release. He released. She picked up the plasma sidearm and looked at it. The thing inside Her.The didn't know what it was holding. It turned the weapon over in both hands with an interest that was almost scholarly. "Curious," it said. Cade got his feet under him. His wrist was fractured. He could feel the specific kind of pain that meant fracture, different from sprain, different from break. And he had approximately 2 seconds before she stopped being curious and remembered she had a sword. He threw the field tablet at her head. Not because it would work, because it was what was in his hand. She caught it without looking. That was when he ran. He woke Dino first, because Dino slept the lightest, and because Dino had the demolition kit. Possessed how, Dino said. He was not asking for reassurance. He was asking for operational parameters. Ancient entity, 2,000-year dormancy, uses human vessels, needs sacrificial blood. I don't know what it needs it for. Full revival of some kind. 6 sacrifices. "There are 6 of us." "Was 6 of us," Dino said, and Cade looked at him and saw he already knew. "Charlene went to check the seismic sensors at 0200. I heard her go." KD said nothing for a moment. Then, "How much ordnance do you have?" "Survey-grade demo charges. Designed for." "How much?" "Enough to bring down about 40 meters of ridge. Maybe more if the faulting runs the way I think it does." "The cave," Cade said. "If we bring down the cave, we kill the body the thing is wearing. We don't necessarily kill the thing." "You know a lot about ancient possessing entities." "I read a lot on long surveys." Dino pulled the charges from his kit bag with the calm efficiency of someone who had accepted the situation and was now simply working within it. "Here's what I don't know. If we force it back to the cave, back to the artifacts, the basin, whatever it needs, and then collapse the whole structure. 2,000-year dormancy starts over," Cade said. "If we're lucky. How do we force it back to the cave?" Dino thought about this. "We take away the vessel," he said. "She's already wearing the vessel. She put on the armor." "No, the armor isn't the vessel. The body is. The human body." He tapped his own chest. "Take away the human body, the thing has nowhere to go. It goes back to what it was, trapped in the artifacts, waiting for the next warm body to walk through." Cade looked at him for a long time. I'm not killing her, he said. I didn't say kill. I said take away. Dino held up a small canister from the medkit. Neurological suspension compound, TSC-7. We inject enough of this, brain activity drops to flatline equivalent for about 90 seconds. Not dead. Not alive in the way that something like this can use. If the thing leaves her body in that 90 seconds, she comes back online and it has nowhere to go. It either dissipates or retreats to the artifacts. That's a big if, yes, Dino agreed. It is. They found the others. Maria huddled behind the drilling equipment with a wrench in her hands and blood on her temple. Anthony hiding in the storage container, with his legs pulled to his chest, muttering coordinates he didn't know he knew. Cade recognized them later as the cave's exact position. Risa missing entirely. 5 left then. 4 once you subtracted Cade, who was the only one who could get close enough to inject the TSC-7 because he was the only one who'd already survived contact. He didn't mention that math to the others. They found Tyrannus in Mara, at the base of the ridge at 0530 hours, in the gray pre-dawn that on this moon had a quality of lavender to it, the sky a shade between purple and blue that he had found beautiful on the first morning, and had not thought about since. She was standing very still, head tilted back, watching the stars fade. The Gladius was at her side. She looked in that moment almost like herself. The posture was wrong. Mara Vasquez walked with a slight forward lean, the posture of someone always reading something just out of frame. But the face was hers, and in the lavender dark, it was almost peaceful. Vasquez, he said. The wrong eyes found him. You keep coming back, Tyrannus said through her voice. Most vessels' companions flee. You don't flee. No, why not? Cade thought about this. The canister was in his left hand, held behind his thigh. Because she's mine, he said. My team. My responsibility. The thing that wore her face seemed to genuinely consider this. You are loyal to her. I'm loyal to all of them. Teresa, I know. A silence that had weight to it, like the pause before a judgment. I have existed for 4,000 years, Tyrannus said. I have worn 47 vessels. Not one of their companions stood where you are standing. Then they were on their own, Cade said. She's not. He moved on the last word, because the last word was a signal he'd agreed with Dino, and because Tyrannus was, despite 4,000 years and 47 vessels, not accustomed to someone who used their own words as tactical distractions. He got the needle into the side of her neck at the junction of the trapezius and clavicle, the spot the medic training said was fastest to systemic circulation, and depressed the plunger. And then Tyrannus threw him 8 feet into the ridge face, and he hit it with his back and slid down it, and sat there for a moment watching the sky turn from lavender to pale gold. Mara Vasquez went rigid, stewed rigid for a count of 3, then dropped. The air around her seemed to thicken. There was no other word for it, no scientific description that captured the exact quality of the change. And something that had no visible form moved through the space around her body in a direction that was not up or down or lateral, a direction that didn't have a name in any language that had been spoken on Earth. The Gladius fell from her hand. Breastplate. The burnished bronze he'd seen with such bewildering clarity in the cave entrance seemed to lose its brightness all at once, corroding in real time back to the dark mottled finish of a 2,000-year-old artifact. Dino hit the detonator. The ridge came down in 2 movements. The first was the crack. A sound Cade felt in his fillings, in the cartilage of his ears, and then the long, grinding rumble of stone following stone into the hollow where the cave had been. The dust cloud moved up the ridge, face like smoke from a fire burning in the earth. When it cleared, there was no cave. It was 40 meters of collapsed ridge, and beneath it, sealed by granite and basalt, and the simple arithmetic of mass, whatever the thing called Tyrannus required to survive. Mara Vasquez woke up on the ground 40 seconds after the TSC-7 wore off. She looked at the sky, still that pale gold now, the first proper light of Terrace IV's sun finding its way past the horizon. And then she looked at Cade, who was sitting beside her with his fractured wrist in an improvised splint, and his back hurting in ways he would be cataloging for weeks. What happened, she said. Her voice was entirely her own. You were possessed by a 4,000-year-old demonic gladiator entity and used as a vessel for a killing spree. You killed 2 members of our team. He paused. I need you to know that last part is not on you. That is not on you. She was quiet for a long time. Teresa and Charlene. She pressed both hands to her face. He let her. After a while she lowered her hands and looked at the collapsed ridge. Is it sealed? Dino thinks dormancy. He met her eyes. It'll be in there a long time. How long? Last time was 2,000 years. She absorbed this. Nodded slowly. We should put a flag on the survey grid. High priority restricted zone. No further excavation. I was going to recommend about 12 flags. Something crossed her face that wasn't quite a smile, but was in the neighborhood of one, tired, fractured at the edges, but present. Your wrist, she said, fractured. I've had worse. You threw a field tablet at me. It was what was in my hand. She looked at him for a moment with an expression he couldn't entirely read. That might be the most Errol Cade thing I have ever been told about myself secondhand. High praise. It was not a compliment. I know, he said. I'm taking it as one anyway. The tribunal on Meridian Station lasted 11 days. Questions were thorough and sometimes insulting, and always asked by people who had not been on the ridge, and could not quite make themselves believe the sequence of events, even with the field recordings and the geological surveys confirming the collapse and the medical report confirming the TSC-7 injection, and the neurological data confirming 93 seconds of flatline equivalent brain activity in Dr. Vasquez's scan. Cade answered every question. He answered them the same way. Each time they were rephrased, which they were often, because the tribunal was trying to find the version of events that made sense in the framework they had for sense. He was patient about this. He understood it. He had spent the first 18 hours after the ridge came down trying to do the same thing himself. On the 9th day, the most senior officer on the tribunal, a woman named Admiral Cho, whose career file Cade had looked up out of professional habit and found deeply impressive, leaned forward and said, Sergeant Cade, in your assessment, what was it? He thought about the thin lavender light, and the wrong eyes in the right face, and the way the air had moved in a direction without a name when the TSC-7 hit. Old, he said. Very old, and very strong, and completely unprepared for someone who wouldn't leave. Cho studied him for a moment. You think that's what stopped it? That you didn't run? I think it had spent 4,000 years wearing people whose companions ran. I think it didn't have a protocol for someone who just kept coming back. He paused. It seemed genuinely confused by it, near the end. Like the concept was new. The concept of loyalty. The concept of someone fighting for another person not because they had to, because they decided to. The room was quiet for a moment. That's a very human thing, Cho said. Yes, ma'am, Cade said. I think that was the problem. The entity, I mean. The Terrace-Fari survey grid was reclassified high-restricted within 6 weeks of their return. The xenoarchaeological report, written primarily by Dr. Mara Vasquez over 4 months of recovery leave, annotated with K.D.'s field notes where she had gaps in her own memory, became one of the foundational documents in what the Survey Commission would later call the persistence studies, the growing body of research into non-biological entities that had survived across geological time by co-opting organic hosts. The report's introduction, which Vasquez wrote last and revised 3 times, ended with a paragraph that Katie read over her shoulder while she was finalizing it, and did not comment on until she asked him what he thought. The entity designated Tyrannus class in this report is neither unique nor defeated. The artifacts that served as its substrate are sealed, not destroyed. The dormancy estimate is speculative. What this survey established is not a solution, but a boundary condition. A limit case for the mechanism by which such entities operate. They require complicity, not the conscious complicity of a willing host, but the passive complicity of a species that, confronted with something ancient and overwhelming and utterly outside its frame of reference, chooses isolation and flight over connection and return. We were not smarter than it. We were not stronger. We did not defeat it through technology, or firepower, or superior knowledge of its biology. We survived because one person chose not to leave, and that choice was not one the entity's 4,000 years of experience had given it any way to anticipate or counter. It had never met that before. It had never met us. I think it's good, Cade said. It's not too much? No. He looked at the screen for a moment. It's accurate. 3 years later, On a survey mission to the Kelon Belt, a geologist named Orrin Price found a cave entrance in a basalt shelf and stood at the threshold for a long time with his helmet lamp cutting a wedge of pale light into the dark. The air moving out of it was warm, pressurized, like breath. Price was not an impulsive man. He was methodical, careful, trained extensively in protocol. He had read the Tarrasa 4 report. He had read it twice. He activated his comm. Vasquez, he said. The research director of the Persistence Studies Division answered on the third tone. "What have you found?" she said. A question. She knew the tone of voice. "A cave," he said. "Something's in it. Don't go in. I wasn't going to. Are you sure?" A pause. The dark at the cave entrance breathed. "I'm sure," he said. "Stay on comms." "I'm sending Cade's team." He stood at the threshold and waited. Outside, the Kellan sun was rising over the basalt shelf, turning the rock from gray to amber to something close to gold. Inside, in the dark, something very old was already aware of him. He could feel it in the pressure of the air, in the warmth that had no heat source, in the faint quality of attention that the dark itself seemed to carry. He did not go in. He did not run. He stood at the line between the two and held it. The thing in the cave, which had been waiting for 2,600 years, did not know what to do with this. It could not compel from a distance. It could not threaten from the dark. It needed a hand to reach for the artifacts. It needed a body to walk into. It waited, so did he. Difference was that he had a comm channel, a research director, and 4 people with demolition charges en route. The thing in the cave had patience and nothing else. Patience was what it had always had, what had always been enough. Until now. "Cade's 40 minutes out," Vasquez said in his ear. "I'll be here," Price said, and he was. In the cold archive rooms of the Survey Commission's Persistence Studies Division, in the growing shelf of field reports and entity contact logs and geological surveys with red flag coordinates, the Tarrasa case file sat between 2 others. Its summary notation, written by Admiral Cho after the tribunal closed, read, "First confirmed contact with a Tyrannus-class persistence entity. Entity successfully contained via substrate destruction. 0 further casualties following initial contact. Mechanism of containment, non-tactical. Human presence, refusal to withdraw, and emotional continuity between team members prevented the standard isolation and flight response upon which the entity's operational model was predicated. Assessment. Humanity's primary defensive asset against entities of this classification is not military, technological, or scientific. It is the fact that we do not leave our own behind. Note for file. This should not be treated as a vulnerability to be exploited. Recommend it be treated as a doctrine." The file had been read in the 3 years since its classification by 47 researchers, 9 military officers, 1 xenobiologist, who had been the first to formally suggest that the Tyrannus-class entities were not malevolent in any meaningful sense, were not anything, really, in the way that biological organisms were things, but were simply very old and very effective at finding the one crack in any social species' armor. The moment when the individual stood alone and chose to save themselves. The xenobiologist's addendum to the file, appended 6 months after the Kellan Belt incident and cleared for general circulation, ended. "The entities do not understand what we are. In 47 vessels over 4,000 years, Tyrannus encountered 47 individuals who, when their companions ran, were ultimately also alone. This is what it had learned to expect. This is what its entire operational model assumed. The 48th vessel's companion did not run. The entity had no response to this. I do not think it is an exaggeration to say that the human habit of returning, irrational, tactically unsound, frequently fatal in every other survival context, is the single thing we do that the old darkness has never learned to account for. We go back for each other. We always have. God help anything that doesn't understand why